Hello, everyone. Did you know that Dafran has moved to farming? Because we just learned that. Also, we'll take a look at some of the experimental patch notes that just went out.
After that, we'll go into depth with all the roster changes, moves, and we're going on the league and close out with our mailbag.
I'm Avast. This is Jayne, and welcome to Contested. What's up, everyone? We are once again not live from the Frontier Communications studio. We in Dallas, Texas. We're still in our bedrooms, Jayne and myself. We were talking in the pre-show that we were getting ready to head back, and sadly, some more circumstances came to the way. And obviously, we're not going to be there right now. It's just a whole mess of a situation. So hopefully next week. Also, we have our own production stuff that we need to do because we also want the show to move forward into a live setup like we've been doing from home. And so we have to get the studio geared up to be that sort of situation as well. But Jayne, how is your I saw some suggestions in chat earlier, but what about the braided beard situation that's going on? How are we moving towards that?
I feel like this is one of those things that if I was Sideshow, I'd put behind a sub goal and then just like mess it up horribly. I'd have this weird thing that you start braiding it and it's not something that. Can you even unbraid a beard? Like if I tangle it up, do I have to shave it half off?
I think you can unbraid a beard, surely. Right? I'm not a hair specialist. I don't know. I really don't know.
I'm pretty sure that no matter what happens, it's gonna you either end up as a Viking or even looking more like a hobo than previously. So it's a dangerous gambit. I wouldn't want to undertake something like that without sufficient preparation. But yes,
much like a farmer.
Much like a farmer.
Much like a farmer.
Yeah, Dafran has run off to become a farmer. He is looking for Snillo in the mushroom forests. So, what do you think? Did he say what he was going to farm?
He said strawberries. I think is the crop he specifically mentioned. Was Dafran said he wants to grow strawberries. Because if you guys are aware, Dafran said that he's taking a break from streaming, like not going to be his full-time thing, I guess, to go to school for an agricultural science degree. And I know Dafran at this point, like he's sort of tangentially related to Overwatch, right? Like he's much more involved with Valorant recently, but it's still just such a weird piece of news where Dafran is just like, let's go be a farmer.
It definitely is one of those things where it's like, it seems serious and real. It's kind of like, hey guys, I'm doing this, and it's one of those things where it's like, it's not like, hey, I'm considering doing this, and you're like, oh, that's interesting, and you kind of just like help a person walk through some life-changing decisions. It's just like somebody's like, you know what, I'm a strawberry farmer now, and you're like, okay. So it's every single day that goes by, I guess it's more and more confirmed that he is actually telling the truth and is committed to becoming a strawberry farmer. But yeah.
Do strawberries grow in Denmark? Do they need a certain environment?
Does anything grow in Denmark?
I'm assuming the people of Denmark have fed themselves with some sort of crops.
I mean, in Canada, we just import our foliage and slowly watch it die. Nothing's hospitable all that way up north. It's just how life goes. Yeah. We have to trade snowballs for food. It's the economy.
I can confirm strawberries grow in Denmark. Okay, so David Thor is apparently either a strawberry specialist or someone from Denmark. Is Danish, so one of the two, maybe both.
Yeah, so, if they didn't grow in Denmark, then that just puts even more merit behind Dafran's work, right?
Yeah, then he's gonna pioneer the strawberries in Denmark until they become like an invasive species, like some plants do when they go to a non-native habitat. Then it's just strawberries everywhere.
You know who could answer these questions? Dafran. But for us non-agricultural science plebeians, forever in the dark.
Yeah, I don't have the information, but I just thought it was like I just thought it was a very interesting thing to see. As someone said, I think farming is chill, but I don't think farming's chill at all. I think farming's probably pretty backbreaking work,
Yeah, I mean, farming would be if you're setting up kind of like a little garden in your backyard.
Yeah, if it's home garden.
Yeah,
right.
But if you're doing like agricultural science, that is definitely taking farming to another level, which is pretty serious stuff. It's like the 2020 stuff. It's history books. it's going to be one of those years at the very early on in like January. Everybody was joking that 2020 was going to be a long year and all that, and then it's like when teenagers in a couple decades are learning history. 2020 is going to be like the year that's super hard to study for the exam. And I think that everybody, we haven't gotten to the alien invasions yet, but I think everyone's gotten to the point this year where it's kind of just like, what is my bug out plan? Do I just go live in the mountains?
Or the invasive strawberry invasion of Denmark.
Yeah,
Don't forget
just
that's going to be on the
destroy the
2020.
ecology.
That's going to be on the list. Is going to be in the invasive strawberries of Denmark. But overall, I just thought it was a funny thing. Like a funny thing for someone that's such a, because also like he did have a very huge, pretty big stream. He was partnered with Atlanta still, so like
Yeah.
he was kind of living the dream, and he's like, yeah, like I'm gonna go till the fields.
Yeah,
like
it is interesting to me that he makes that decision, because that doesn't necessarily seem like a decision that you would like. Is it completely necessary for you to quit streaming in order to go
be a farmer? I mean, it is
be
a
a
super
farmer?
pretty hours intensive work, I'd imagine.
but
if you're
it's,
taking
you
it,
know,
if you're going
there's-
pro in farming, as they say.
But it's not like people haven't streamed pretty regularly when they've been doing their own academic works. ML7 just finished law school before he went kind of full time into streaming. So it's like other people have gone and done things, I assume, of equal difficulty.
I mean, I think the difficulty it's probably not necessarily difficulty, right? Because you can be someone that is either like because I think farming is not so much a thing about difficulty, but there are very specific hours you must farm for certain crops, right? Like you must be doing work between X and X hours, right? While law school, you can probably sort of do it like whenever you're free, like you can sit there and write your papers or do your homework for law school, like whenever. But for farming, you got to be out during these certain hours, I think. So probably, there has to be something. I don't know. It sounds like he just doesn't want to stream anymore for me. Is what it said. Because he said he just doesn't want to stream. He said he'd been in front of his computer for like a third of his life, and I don't want to be in a computer in front. It sounds like someone that just didn't want to stream anymore.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully he's saved enough from his adventures in the esports world that he can probably, I assume that he's probably made enough money that he could be pretty close to thinking about retiring. So hopefully this is something that he's going after, not because he's just blown all his money and he needs to find a real job now that he's burnt out, but hopefully it's something he's just doing legitimately because he enjoys.
Avast looks high. I'm not even close. I'm just high on agricultural knowledge. All right, that's all I'm
growing something a little bit more than strawberries, are you?
That's it. But I mean, that's really it, guys. I'm not under any substances other than life. But that's enough about farming now, Jayne. We spent a long time about
that
farming.
was quite a farming segment.
We
you just played Stardew Valley and got really you just got hooked.
I mean, the path to hoe, as they say, instead of the path to pro, but it's the path to hoe. I also, didn't you want to talk? I think let's talk more about the experimental changes, actually, now on a more Overwatch related topic.
I like that you looked at the run of the show just to be like, what were we supposed
I was like,
to actually
what's next? I couldn't remember.
I mean, we didn't even get started.
His shirt and skin are almost the same color. What?
You're just getting slagged today.
I'm getting slammed with various criticisms today. I mean, I don't know. Like, this is not even close. Not even close to the same. Whatever. Experimental notes, Jayne. We have to talk about experimental notes because there was an experimental change. They changed Genji. They changed Genji buffs. They changed Hanzo. Yep. And you know what they didn't really change was Moira, which I don't like quite as much.
You don't like this? Do you have strong opinions about Moira?
I have
Avast?
very strong opinions.
Do you have opinions that you would like to share with the class of Avast?
Yeah, I mean, I made a tweet yesterday telling you we're gonna talk about this, but like I was just thinking, like one of those moments when you're just thinking, it's dangerous. And for me, thinking is a very tedious task already. It's have to get a lot of gears moving, it's tough to get all the mental machinery in motion up there at times. But I was thinking about the fact that when we look back in Overwatch, at the history of Overwatch, all these characters that that were pretty non-mechanically intensive or not so much that, but also were just less engaging at points, like old Symmetra, old Torb, even old Brigitte, not Pepe hands, but like
two different ultimate Symmetra.
Exactly. And then also Symmetra, when it used to be a lock-on like left click beam that didn't charge up, it was just like a tether. Yeah. And so I was thinking about these heroes, and I was like, wow, a lot of these are actually pretty much more engaging than they used to be and are actually pretty interesting. Even Brigida, which is still not a core inherently FPS centric, but is a lot more engaging and a lot more punishable than she was before. And then I'm looking at like Moira and I'm like, they have done nothing to her. Nothing has changed. And the new experimental patch notes have just adjusted her damage and increased like essentially her healing and like made her more healing focused, which is even more boring, I would
Yep.
feel, and than it was before. And she still is like not mechanically intensive. And for me, I don't care as much about the mechanically intensive part because we've had this discussion before in that like introductory characters that have a pretty low skill floor are not necessarily a bad thing. What is
No.
bad is if the skill ceiling is really low. And that's where I think Moira currently sits, is that she's not very engaging and doesn't have a very high skill ceiling at all. Is my particular criticism.
Yeah, Moira's an interesting one that I've always kind of been critical for, specifically because of the lack of utility. You know, Moira is a character that she heals or she does damage, and her ultimate just causes her to do healing and damage at the same time. It's just
Yeah.
that's her entire kit. You know, there's nothing really about her that takes a large amount of skill. You know, there's at the end of the day, that like right click does have a little bit of tracking if you're going to be going against small, fast moving targets. You know, somebody who's new to PC or aiming with the controller might really struggle to actually put out some damage against like a Tracer or a really like fast Lucio or something like that. But other than that, there isn't really much of a skill ceiling to reach on Moira. And I
Yeah,
don't think
it's
that's
just not fun. It's just not fun to
no.
play against, especially as a flanker character, where like it defeats a lot of the weaknesses or some of the upsides of being a high skill support like player. Is you deal with
Mhm.
flankers, and more is just like Spidey web you with my
Yeah.
purple beam.
I
I
mean,
don't know
like
what my sound effects were there.
there's a big difference between a character being fun and engaging and a character being unfun to play against. You know, and I don't think that every single character needs to be super engaging or have kind of a lot of things to do. And I think that you see this in like Mercy's design, for example, where Mercy is her kit is kind of so simple that a lot of the strengths of being a good Mercy player come from doing things that are not involved with your character at all, kind of like scouting, communication, and positioning, and keeping yourself alive just from like knowing where the flankers are and things like that. And I think Moira's a little bit there. You know, she's a very simple character, but especially with the other nerfs that she made to her affecting her orb, that adjusted more of kind of like how unfun she was to play against, kind of the randomness of that ability. So, I care less about a character being super rewarding to play. You know, no matter what the state of the character is, somebody out there is going to one trick her. Somebody out there is going to, you know, cosplay as them or something like that. It's not a big deal that every single character is fun and engaging. You know, and at some point, there's always going to be a character that is the least fun. I think that it's more important that they focus on characters that are unfun to play against, and you know they targeted that on Moira. So her kind of present status being a low skill character and just kind of like pretty simple. It is what it is, and I think that especially when they have, you know, like Baptiste was a good character introduced in terms of like skill ceiling as well as utility. You know, complaints about the other sides of his power rating and immortality field aside, like he was a better character design, more along the lines of what you're talking about. Not every character can be an Anna or a Baptiste.
Yeah, and also I do think those issues are one and the same, though. For me, at least, is like for sure, stuff being unfun to play against is definitely an overall bigger problem than stuff being fun to play, right? But especially in a game like Overwatch, but oftentimes they're interlinked, I think, because like why is Moira unfun to play against? Because she flankers can't do anything against her. She just rolls you. She
Yeah.
actually just rolls you. Sure, also, and she has like a get out of jail free card that no other support has. The closest is like Baptiste, who has like essentially an ult on cooldown with his immortality drone, but she just has
Yep.
like a I'm going to fade into the nether realm and come back. And like I also get to move while doing so, and on top of being self-sustaining and having heals and having an ult that charges very quickly that does it all. But that also ties into why she's not fun to play too, because she doesn't do anything that's particularly engaging, and she has no, like as other people in the chat have said, she has no tech. Like with Mercy, you have jump tech. With Bap, you have certain techs you want to do. Like there's all sorts
Yep.
of like little things you can do, even with characters that aren't necessarily traditionally FPS oriented, but are still engaging to play, and also are not necessarily super unrewarding to play against. But Moira just doesn't have any of those, and I know that Blizzard can rework this because they've done it for characters like Symmetra. I thought Symmetra was irredeemable back in the day. I was
Yeah.
like, this character is really dumb and like I don't think there's anything great about it. And now Symmetra is actually a relatively involved, pretty interesting hero, I think, at times.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm just gonna play devil's advocate just to make sure that nobody gets mad at us in the comment section or anything like that. But Moira does have a few techs, very very minor ones. You have the mobility techs with Fade, which got nerfed along with the Brigida Shield bash techs. But then you also have like the orb cancels, and then even just like the usage of orbs. You know, little kind of things, finding places where you can bounce in between for them to stick longer, things like that. Like those don't really count on the same level of tech and difficulty.
Yeah.
For example, like reverse guardian angel or something, which is a tech
Or
that is,
wall riding, just as a mechanic.
yeah,
You know?
true.
Wall riding is a great example.
Yeah, and then I forgot my second point, so we'll just
I'm sorry. Sorry for stealing it straight from your brain.
you
That's
better
me.
apologize for my poor working memory.
that's me stealing your frontal cortex. But I mean, overall, still the point remains of like, and also we have to take into account is like, yes, you can have very specific instances of tech, but in general, it's not about these very specific instances, right? Like Brig, Shield, Bash, Jump. Like
Yeah.
that's like sure that tech exists, but it wasn't really the focus of why she was super like unfun to play against. You know, it's much the same with Moira. It's like realistically, especially at a professional level, which is sort of the level we like to focus on because it trickles down into the lower levels often, especially like the GM plus. Is that like it's what is the most consistent type of tech that players will be doing that actually is impactful and interesting to the game. Moira jump tech, for the most part, is not something you'll ever be doing on a regular basis. Sure,
No.
you can do it. You can do it. It exists. But the reality is you get much more out of Moira oftentimes just not doing that and saving your
Yes.
fade for situations where you get jumped. You know, like that's the part where you want the consistent aspects of a character where things you do, where how she interacts with the enemy team and the other heroes in the enemy team that she'll be doing regularly to be the intensive parts, like the parts that you want there to be mastery of. You want there to be like a super fun and engaging, like skill-based portion of, like, even if it's not always FPS, because I think too many people in the wider world, Jayne, always bring up Overwatch like, oh, it's not an FPS, it's blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, it's not really a full FPS, and that's fine, right? Like, doesn't everything have to be fully FPS centric at that point? We've sort of accepted that for Overwatch when there's tanks and supports involved. It's more of just stuff we still want things to be engaging and fun to play against and fun to play with. And
Yeah.
Moira's tech is not any of those.
And we're not like I've got a little bit of a biased opinion on this. I originally started out when I played Tier 3 and tried to make it into contenders myself. I started as a Lucio player, and this was right at the start of when Mercy started becoming strong. So because I was main support, I was the one tasked with learning Mercy. And this is also the period of time where she had like 7 or so major changes to her character over a short period of time. And each time they kind of changed her, they introduced a new tech, you know. And I say introduced a new tech in the way that they just kind of like changed how all her stuff worked, and suddenly there were new, completely unplanned interactions. You know, people talk about the super jump on Mercy as if that was in any way an intentional decision by the developers. You know, a lot of these techs that do come out are completely unintended side effects of the game engine, and some of these are easier to reproduce. Some of these are, you know, more powerful. And I have absolutely no question in my mind that Blizzard doesn't know about these things until people kind of figure them out, and then they judge the power of it based off of its difficulty. So at the same time as like these techs are interesting and cool, like they were unplanned, they're not part of the initial game, like they're not a part of the initial character design. They're very much, you would call them, I guess, emergent gameplay. And a lot of text for characters, because, you know, when I was really, really going hard in Overwatch, I made it at a point to be able to play all of the characters. And the worst thing that I always hated about learning characters was learning text that had required like frame precision or something like that, and gave you this like really, really strong power spike in ability, but were super hard to reproduce and were not very consistent at all. So it's like, is that an example of a skill ceiling? You know, like a speed runner doing the same action over and over again just to make sure that they constantly get those frame perfect hits or something. Like, you know, that's definitely a mechanical skill, but it's not a rewarding, engaging, or fun mechanical skill to me personally.
Yeah, I mean, that all makes sense in terms of like, I get where it's not necessarily a intended side effect, right? But that's not always a bad thing. I think some of
No.
some of the best things about games that people love are so oftentimes unintended consequences of a game engine, right? Like not anything inherently bad about that myself. More of this, like, I think it really, I don't care as much about that stuff. Is more of just Moira's base design, because there are clear examples of how we can make it more engaging, right? Like
Mhm.
her right click, they obviously in the experimental notes, guy. We'll just read off the experimental notes to you guys in chat. Is that if you haven't seen them, they reduce Echo's focus beam range, so which is good because that thing is crazy strong.
Yeah,
Actually, the tank
one,
melter.
that's one way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, which I'm happy with that. Like, I
Yeah.
think there's maybe still more that could be touched, but that's a good start. They buffed Genji, so all Genji mains, you can rejoice that your character's still bad, but it's been buffed. And the primary fire has been increased. They've reduced the spread for the secondary and also increased deflect duration. And you can now cancel deflect, which is something that you never used to be able to do, which is actually pretty nice. And then they've buffed Hanzo the Storm Arrows, which I think is a mind-bogglingly weird decision because Storm Arrows are already so strong.
Yeah, and one of the weird things about that change as well is the fact that that's pushing over a breakpoint. Usually, you don't see them buff
Yeah.
characters past breakpoints, but this was like one of the big things that was about Hanzo in the first place is that his damage was enough for one headshot plus one body shot. And Storm Arrow, it's 70 damage. You do 70, 140 if one of them's a headshot plus another 70. That's 210 damage. That's enough to kill a 210 or sorry, a 200 HP hero in one fewer arrow. So it's not just increasing your damage output by a certain percentage, which 18% in this case. But it's
Quick maths.
It's actually breaking them past a breakpoint, which is like when you go past breakpoints, that's scary stuff. Like Soldier 76, for example, the change from 19 damage to 20 damage. That's a 5% change there, but that one was a big one because that was one fewer bullet as well, and especially with the spread and everything like that, it made a lot more than just 5% damage output. But yeah,
it's just not a good. I mean, I just don't think like the changes are weird because and then finally the final change, which sort of prompted this whole rant, chat, was they reduced the healing. They increased her healing per second from her left click, affectionately known as the P spray, and the secondary fire, her biotic grasp, was pretty much reduced in damage. Like the damage per second reduced from 50 to 40. So she's not as good as like straight up winning, like insta kill, like destroying flankers. Like she can still duel them pretty effectively. Flankers won't be able to do anything against her, but she just won't kill them as quickly now.
Mhm.
Which I think is okay. But the reality is that all you've done is take one unfun mechanic to play against, which is her right click, and then buff her other unfun mechanic, which is her mindless healing that she does to get her
Heal.
super fast ult.
Yeah.
And hasn't actually touched any things that make her a less engaging. Like, there's still hasn't changed anything really about that. Like, and people have like, why not we just do something more engaging with her kit, right? Why don't we at the very minimum make her right click like a tracking beam, like Symmetra? Symmetra used to be. Why can't it be tracking? Why do you have to like? Why does it lock on? It's not about the damage. It's about the fact that even with 40 damage per second, Jayne, I still think that that's still plenty to make a Tracer or a Genji run away from you. That's plenty because like if you take like 2 ticks of damage, you're already like out of half your health essentially, and if not more for Tracer, and you have to back off or recall. Like it's really not the damage that's the problem.
It's definitely the orb and the fade that determine whether a flanker is going to go mess with Moira, right? The ability to just reposition whenever you want. You can at any point in time, you can just be like, I am not taking damage anymore, and now I'm over here. So even if you see that a flanker is thinking about you, you can just position yourself in a place where a fade will get you out of it. It's like you don't have to fade in order to keep yourself. Just threatening to have that option to fade away is enough for a flanker to just be like, go away. Especially if you do that, buy enough time for you to pull some distance and then get your orb out. Which is like, the life steal is still there, so that sustain and survivability is still there as well. But the I want to quiz you because you saying that actually reminded me of 2 more Moira techs. Do you know how her left click works? Like
which one? What in what way? Like besides just the AoE healing? Like I honestly, I'm gonna be real. For me, I've never really delved into like the super specific mechanics of something. It's always been much more about like, well, how does it like what's its effect that I see. So I will say straight up, I'm not a super statistical based man when it comes to the character interactions.
Yeah, so like the thing with Moira heals is that she's got like while you're actually spraying heals on somebody, they receive a specific amount of healing, but then there's a lingering heal afterwards. So you can actually just be more efficient because there's always going to be that like 3 seconds of I think it's like 16 HPS or something like that after you've stopped healing somebody. And then also, and I'm not sure if this is still in the game, but in the same way that the scroll wheel Lucio bug
Yeah.
was a thing that they fixed, if you repeatedly spam right click on somebody through either like spamming right click super fast or scroll wheel, it regenerates your healing resource faster than just holding your right click on somebody. So
The more you learn every day. I mean, the reality is though about all of this is that I think still we're arguing about this. We're arguing about the wrong things here because like, or we're not arguing, but I should say like chat is saying that like, well, I like the changes to Moira, but the problem with Moira was never really her healing. She did a lot of healing, but so does Bap, right? So does Ana. Like, but you can still punish those heroes for the most part, but you can't really punish Moira. You know, you can't punish someone that can become invincible and run away from you and then life steal you for damage while having an orb that can either then finish you off or heal her. And her ult also heals her and does damage and is almost impossible to really miss.
Yeah, like the argument that we're very much kind of putting forth at this point in time is the fact that any of these kind of style of changes that Blizzard is putting to Moira are the wrong kind of changes in order to put Moira in a good place. So changing her healing, changing her damage, that's not going to really change Moira as a hero. In the examples that you're talking about, Ana and Baptiste, both of them have a lot more of a tactical counterplay to them. It's a lot easier to force a nade or an immortality field or even the shift, like the self-healing on Baptiste as well. It's a lot easier to get those cooldowns out and then go in for the takedown. Whereas Moira, it's way harder to force. She's a much better harasser, even than flankers, where is the domain that the flanker should be better at. And then even if you get orb or fade out, they have the other one to just kind of swap between in order to stay alive and always be a threat. Which, have we talked about, hasn't exactly been the most kind of engaging sort of playstyle.
Yeah, and that's just the root of the issue for me is that at this point we have seen evidence that Blizzard can remake heroes to be more engaging. We have seen characters like Symmetra in particular and Torb, who took a focus away from like the turret into much more of his gun play and has reworked his ult. Like we have seen heroes become more engaging over time, and Moira sort of just stayed the same and still takes up this very, very valuable real estate of a support that does not have to fear dive ever.
Yeah.
Like at no point does a Moira have to fear being dove. And that's sort of one of the intrinsic assets, I think, between like the counterplay between supports and the rest of character cast is how do I survive aggression? And Moira's like, I don't even care. I don't even care what you do because I'm going to win no matter what.
I mean, you're not going to win no matter what. But
well, yeah, but point, it's a lot of value.
The very obvious counter argument that we've kind of been ignoring in the fact that we're saying that Moira just kind of rolls flankers, but and we've also at the same time argued that she's not fun or engaging because she has no utility. But the very clear counter argument to the case that we're presenting is the fact that if you are getting rolled by flankers as a support, the option that you have available to you to stop being rolled is to go Moira at the cost of giving up your utility and just being pigeonholed completely into what is short range healing. Yeah. So you get inconsistent long range healing, no utility for the exchange of rolling the fuck out of flankers. And that's my F-bomb for the episode.
There's our one F-bomb for the episode is well, I guess each one of us
get one. That's
we both get one. But I do think that like, I hit my backdrop. I was worried about now the
expose the
Oh
bedroom.
no! Now they'll know that I'm not at the Frontier Communications studio.
Good thing they didn't see Sandra.
Yeah, good thing. But the point there, I think, also to your point is that I do think Moira. One thing that Moira does very well, and it sort of fits in the category of Brigitte, of that it's good to have supports that can deal with an aggression, right? Because I don't think stylistically Overwatch should exist of just these characters are forced to just die to dives pretty much, like unless you play perfect, right? That seems a little unfair to support players. So, and also definitely reduces the amount of stylistic matchups you can have, because if the game comes down to dive supports kill them, then you pretty much have one style of play. that can be
Yes.
played, right?
Yeah.
Outside of like some other factors. So I like the concept of heroes that can punish flankers, especially supports, and live through dives, but it just shouldn't be so easy to achieve, right?
Mhm.
Like that should be and it shouldn't get so much value without anyone else helping it. Like Moira shouldn't be solo allowed to do everything with very little risk for high reward, right? It should always be a trade-off for risk reward. And so like that's why I don't like the concept of having an auto locking beam. That's why I don't like Fade. That's why I don't like Fade being a cooldown where you become invulnerable and go wherever you want and no one knows where you're going. Her ult being able to heal and damage. You know, she has AoE heals to do so much. Like she's just too survivable. And I think it's mostly centered around the Fade often, but her lifesteal is a problem too. And I don't think the issue should be she does the damage she does. The issue should be it should make her harder for her to do damage. The end goal is like even 40 damage per second is still too much damage for someone to just aim in your general direction and be able to like not have to worry about effectively hitting their shots, right? If they're going to want to keep that mechanic, I think you need to tune the damage down and the lifesteal down even more because it's just too easy to get value out of. If it becomes like a tracking beam, sort of like Symmetra's rework, I'm a lot happier with that. I think then it becomes like you have to actually sort of aim to get value out of that mechanic. Otherwise, it's too strong without any really downside at all. There's like no downside to that. And that's my main problem with Moira as a hero and why I would like to see things like that changed is she needs to be harder to get value from her overall. And there needs to be more risk as well that if you're using certain cooldowns, they're down for longer or you're vulnerable, or they can know where you're going. You know, like there's a lot of options there to adjust that. And we haven't really touched them. Instead, it's just been like, she does too much damage, which I don't really think is the problem with her at all.
Yeah, the last point that I'll make on this before we should probably move on and talk
Probably
about
move on,
something
yeah.
other than Moira is the fact that like I'm always going to be a huge fan of things that make the game more tactical. And then, like you said, right at the tail end of your statement there, the longer cooldowns does make this interplay between having to actually decide when you can use it. Because Fade is a relatively short cooldown. You know, it's very rare that unless the cooldown was specifically forced out for the purpose of then killing the Moira, or if it was misused, that that becomes kind of relevant to dive onto her or something. Where Immortality Field at its like 24-second cooldown is the game state for everybody in the game changes when that character uses that ability. So I definitely like that increased cooldown on very, very impactful cooldowns. And I think that's something that they should continue to try and strive for. It was one of the main arguments about GOATs being such a kind of brain drain in terms of how professional Overwatch is played, is the fact that because fighting was so long and so like health pools were massive, healing was massive, it was not uncommon to see fights that you'd have like 6 to 10 ultimates used like every single fight, and that the idea of kind of like ult economy really went away because ultimates were pretty much up every single fight, and there was no kind of counterplay. There was no kind of just like ult economy or tracking. It became less relevant. You just assumed they had ults pretty much in every single fight. So, and how many nerfs have they now made to ult charge over the history of the game? It's been quite a few.
Been a few. I mean, the latest was like the universal ult charge reduction.
Yeah.
Like not that like a little bit ago. So overall, it's still we can both agree nothing wrong with being introductory. Just we need to see something to make it more tactical at times and less, and you get less value. You get more value the more you put into it, the better you are at it versus the inverse. Or I guess getting tons of value without a lot of effort. But moving on, because we can't have an entire episode dedicated to Moira, even if we could, but we shouldn't.
We shouldn't. We really shouldn't. And this question is going to bother me. So I'm asking chat with them changing Genji's Shuriken from 28 damage to 30 damage. Is that the last hero that has a damage output that doesn't end in 0 or 5?
Anyone else that's keeping track of the numbers, pop those out. Myself, I don't have the numbers. So are
there any like weird numbers left in Overwatch? I feel like everything is nice round divisible numbers. Everything's divisible by 5.
So everyone in their math departments, they get on that, get your statistical analysis out and your R-squared values. And for us, we have to talk about the people are saying Diva, Zarya. Actually, apparently a lot of
shotgun characters don't count because you do like the number of pellets times the pellets themselves.
Well, there
like
we go.
per pellet. Come on, that doesn't count.
Well, apparently, well, there you go. You've been owned. The exception does not count. But
Zen is Zen.
well, okay. Well, so there's still plenty, right? In that case, it's a lot of that then, right? We're still
Okay.
plenty weird in the numbers department. But rosters. There's been a lot of roster moves, and essentially, what is the mid? I would count this as like mid-season, maybe a
Yeah, I
little
guess.
over.
Wow, that's weird. I still
Yeah.
feel like it's this. You know, I didn't really feel like the season got started, but
It's
yeah,
we've
it
had a
is.
lot
I
of
guess it
roster
is
moves in the
mid-season.
Overwatch League, haven't we? It's about
It's
mid-season. It doesn't
June.
feel like it. Yeah, it's crazy, and there's been a lot of changes and a lot of weird things. But I mean, right off the bat, when we talk changes, is the changing of the guard with the Washington Justice. We had
Yeah.
a spotlight on them not too long ago about their release of their GM and one of their assistant coaches, Banny, where I was critical of them, and I also continue to remain critical of them. I think moving forward is how I feel, Jayne.
Yeah, I certainly don't think that you were alone in your criticism of the Washington Justice.
No.
Like, they released some very popular and, as far as the public knows, very competent individuals. And they did it in a really not so nice manner, which seemed kind of completely, without merit. Yeah, we don't have to rehash that. But the recent news, of course, is the fact that Envytv has just been released, and that we assume that Lulsish is not going to be that far behind in this announcement either. So Lulsish and Envytv, tank pair that originally actually came from Team Envy before that academy team was released. And so with them being released, that's the final Western players on the roster departing, which basically guarantees or confirms, whatever word you want to use, that the Washington Justice will be.
Well, technically, Lulsish hasn't left yet, and he's still on the roster, right? We're just assuming he's.
If I were a betting man,
yeah, I agree. I think Lulsish is 100% next on the chopping block, right? Like, there's no other way around it. Like, Lulsish will be the final member of, like, when you're there's like the intro for Skyrim. It's like my ancestors smiling upon me, or yours Imperial. Like, that's Lulsish, the final remaining member of the Justice.
He fights to the last man.
That's literally that's it, because
if they don't release Lulsish, I'm gonna have some serious questions, like what is he doing? So
that would be far weirder than anything else, because then it's like we've released every Western member except for Lulsish, who hasn't played for 2 seasons and is not even in the States still. Jonu and Stitch are getting to the States, I think, before Lulsish,
and they would just just never talk about it, never refer to the fact that Lulsish, he's just always in team photos, but nobody ever talks to him. They make sure they keep the press away, sort of thing. You hang him up in the closet at night to make sure that he's well tended to. But this fanfic got really weird. I think the most interesting part of this to me is the fact that they are going for a very much a Korean roster, right? But their head coach is going to be the next most notable English-speaking member of the team, and that seems strange, I guess. John Galt, originally from Singapore, and I'm gonna say that he doesn't speak Korean. I'm like 90% on that.
I honestly don't have the information with respect to that either. I really don't. That those tweets sound like it was mutual. But once again, mutual doesn't necessarily mean, like, mutual doesn't mean what you think it means in this case. Okay, this is we're dealing with the power of words, chat. Okay, the power of words you can look at many things here. Okay, so I'm leaving this team because all of my other Western members are gone and we're picking a full Korean roster. Like, what is your example? Do you sit on a bench for the rest of the season, or do you hope to get out of environment and maybe now you don't have a buyout, so it's much more likely that you can find another team, right? It's the trade-off. It's the trade-off of what does Envytv do in that situation, right? All mutual stands there is that Envytv agreed to have his contract ended, so they don't have to pay him the remainder of his contract, but also Envytv no longer has a buyout and no longer has anything associated with him with the team. So he's a lot more free to pursue other interests, like other teams, go back to contenders if he wanted to. He has a lot of options in terms of his flexibility, but he also means he doesn't get paid.
Go back to contenders.
I mean, honestly, generally, on average, not always, it has often been better for some players to look for a better offer. But at this point, for Envytv, I would say going back to contenders is not the best option. I think contenders is not really the same as it used to be. I just don't think it's a good option to go back to contenders. But you could still have no buyout, right?
And at the same time, we're saying that it's not a good option. We did see somebody who went back to contenders, played on 3 different contenders team, and has just recently made it back into the Overwatch League. So NumLock is probably the next roster move that we can talk about there. An individual originally, Team UK. He did some good work on Team UK. For some reason, I'm thinking that that's like the earliest example of him being a really popular player. Somebody was probably going to correct me, but
I mean, he was a staple in early Overwatch, but I mean, early there was no. I would argue that there wasn't like really insanely popular players outside of like a select few. So in early Overwatch, right? So
yeah, for some, I think the first time that maybe it's just for me personally, the first time that I noticed him was in Team UK, and then he was one of the early members of the Los Angeles Valiant before being released, and then like really quite a hard and earnest worker, but couldn't make it back in and played with, oh god, I know this, Montreal Rebellion.
Yes, you're correct.
What are the other two?
I mean, he also was Envy at one point, wasn't he?
Yeah, and
I believe.
I'm just gonna look this up.
Yeah, he was with Envy. Yeah, I was with Envy. Envy has had almost every good tank player that has ever cycled through NA.
There is kind of this weird thing where because this was another, I mentioned it with Lulsish and Elivote as well. But Envy had this problem because they were winning, and so many tanks were needed in the Overwatch League that like 3 times in a row, their main tank and their off tank got picked up as a duo, and Envy had to go find new people to fill in. So they picked up duos and just, I guess, sold.
The only 2 that weren't were Halfy Cool and NumLocked.
Yes,
those were the only 2 that weren't picked up as a duo.
And I
so they were the exception, I believe.
I want to say it was Karasuno, but I'm pretty sure that's wrong. What was your team history, dude? It was near Ricky, the Finnish esports group. That's why I couldn't remember.
Yeah. Well, European contenders. Who can remember European contenders? You know,
exactly.
Who can remember? But the point there is that regardless, NumLock has now come in for Beast. And I don't.
We don't know if he's coming in for Beast.
I mean, well, okay, he's coming in as a main tank player.
Yeah.
He was originally he was signed as a coach, because the interesting thing is he was signed as a coach.
Yes.
And then they changed it to a player contract.
Yeah,
which is a pretty interesting move. Which
is
not
very interesting.
Unprecedented in esports, but it is weird in
Has
Overwatch.
It happened before in Overwatch?
Yes, it has. For Immortals at NGE Land 2017, Chance, the coach for the coach for Immortals, was Nomi couldn't get into the country because of visa issues, and so he played main tank for Immortals at NGE Land, and he was their coach. So it has happened before.
That is the most big brain background research knowledge I have ever seen you pull out. I am seriously impressed.
So because I remember that specifically because I was also at that event. I was working the DX Racer booth, I think. So I was that was back when we were Hammers Esports. And it was Jake, and then Rob 420, aka Rob Dab Now, and myself at the DX Racer booth. So
a historic event.
It was a historic event. And that was when Immortals won, and that's where Verbo got his infamous tattoo of the Logitech mouse on his chest, was after that event.
Nice.
So it was definitely a piece of gaming history at NG Land. But yes, the point is that it has happened before. But it hasn't happened in Overwatch League. There's been the reverse, where you've had a player become a coach, obviously, but not.
Oh yeah, and that's happened quite a few times.
Yeah, that's happened quite a few times.
Yeah. So, like the weird thing about this NumLock situation, I'm gonna rest on this one just for a little bit longer. The announcement that he was joining the Toronto Defiant as a coach was May 28th, and then the announcement that he's joining them as a player was yesterday, which, just for our podcast friends, was June 3rd. So, quick maths. Right?
Quick maths.
6 days.
Pretty short time frame.
Yeah. So how do you do that? Like, what kind of internal dynamics causes you to first hire somebody as a coach, and then your coach comes in and goes like, "Oh, your main tank shit, I could do way better," and then like, okay.
I mean, personally, I just think Defiant is like exploding in a lot of ways. Like, they haven't had success. Surefour has publicly is not playing, and has been a public article from the management of Toronto Defiant saying Surefour binged himself because he wasn't happy with the team.
Yeah, he was pretty mopey on stream as well. There were a few clips that were shared around. He just, Surefour is a very proud individual, a very talented individual, and I'm sure that he was looking for an upgrade after the team swap, and for him to kind of go backwards, take a few steps back in terms of progress.
A very few, a lot of steps
Yeah,
back. I
a
would say
lot of step backwards.
plunging off the stairwell of steps back. Like
Especially with that coupled with the poor Team Canada performance, which I think hit a lot of the Team Canada guys pretty hard. That's a event that everybody kind of looks forward to, and the Team Canada is, despite being such a small country, is has quite a lot of fans on. So, there's definitely reasons why the public would not be happy about Surefour rather, and I don't think that is necessarily the fault of the Toronto Defiant org that somebody like Surefour is taking a break. I think that it shows good maturity from Surefour to know that he needs that break instead of kind of burning out or just like exploding. Better to take a 1 week or 2 week mental break and come back strong instead of just being like. So,
I feel like this has been a kind of glossed over topic. Oh, the Muma and hydration. I mean, that's a separate issue, but we can talk about that a little bit, but we have a lot more to get through as well.
We actually have quite a few things.
Because pretty much it's just weird that NumLock was signed as a player, as a coach, moved to a player, and to me that suggests that it is a roster in flux. That is a roster that is not confident in its pickups. That is because if you were ever going to sign a coach and say this guy who we signed to coach us is now going to be competing and potentially taking one of our players' spots, that shows that there's a lack of confidence in the team, a heavy lack of confidence. And it should not bode well. And also, this is not an indictment of NumLock necessarily. I do think NumLock has been, in fact, one of his last LAN performances at Atlantic Showdown last year was pretty good with the Envy tank lineup of him and Happy Cool. I do think NumLock, and he didn't get really a fair shake on Valiant, though to be fair, he was competing with like Fate, and Fate is obviously really, really good. So I do think that NumLock has been sort of an overlooked talent at points. I don't think he's ever been spectacular, but he's been overlooked.
Yeah, and I think he's a hard worker and has a good mentality, and especially for a main tank, like that's a great quality for people to have. And like Beast was somebody who very early on, I think a lot of people identified as being, at least personally, I identified him as being the weakest member of the Toronto Defiant, and kind of like the reason why, one of the reasons why they were struggling. Now, in recent times, I think that Beast has improved. So I think that criticism is less valid. So if they do find that like NumLock is better at Winston and Beast is better at Reinhardt, or the reverse or something like that, that seems to be probably one of the reasons, the most legitimate reasons I could think of to actually move him in as a player. It's kind of like, Beast is better at this, instead of just having this very competent, hardworking, positive guy who's been grinding main tank on 3 different contenders teams for over a year now. Teach this guy. How about they just focus on their specialties? We're already paying the man a salary. Like, it makes sense. The pieces just kind of like click together. You can see the matrix. It's like, we have a path forward. It's like you maybe could have done that in the first place. Foresight not the strongest point, but
and NumLock would be a Ryan specialist for sure. Yes, NumLock would be much more Ryan centric. Beast has, especially when his time at Fusion University, was much more Winston focused. So they would split them up as like a Ryan.
I mean, NumLock's Winston is still pretty good.
Yeah, it's still pretty good, but if anything, if they want to specialize, then they would probably focus NumLock onto the Ryan and the other heroes, and like Beast onto the Winston. But it just depends, right? Because we don't know where the direction is going. My point is just they're not confident in their roster, and everything that points towards Defiant is not currently. I don't think anyone should currently be confident with them, because it's clear they're dealing with. In fact, there was an article just released where Yiska did an interview with a bunch of coaches, and they talked about the effects of confidence on players, and like how confidence is probably the most important thing that could not be objectively measured. In terms of like when you see like a team and you look at a team, like you can't really just be like take my slide ruler out and be like, the confidence looking pretty good in the metric units today. The scientist, when I look at my standardized units here, the confidence is a pretty good percentage. But it is extremely important when you look at an overall team's trajectory within Overwatch League, and I don't think Defiant have any right now at all.
I mean, how many times have you heard me talk about the qualitatives and just rah and rant on about those sort of things? Like one of the main reasons why, I really struggle to kind of put out power rankings, like preseason stuff, or when a team takes a dip, it's kind of like, maybe these people aren't shit. Maybe they're just having trouble with the qualitatives, and one of those being confidence. Like that's something that I've been saying for a very long time. It's nice to see other people kind of joining in on it and recognizing that it is such a large deal.
Yep.
But yeah.
Confidence also is increasing if you're a Paris Eternal fan because Sparkle's of age.
You beat me to
Sparkle's
it.
of yeah, I beat you to it. I know. I saw you pausing for it, but Sparkle's also of age as another midseason, sort of a mid. It's not really a midseason roster move because he's already on the roster, right? But it is something to look out for. Is that Sparkle, not Sideshow? I know that Sideshow's on the Florida Mayhem guys, but he'll be off the roster come the season returning. So I don't even want to touch that topic as someone that had to watch the atrocity, who literally passed the atrocity. But like Sparkle's of age, and I do think that Sparkle is going to potentially change the landscape of Eternal pretty heavily if he shows up in a way that he did in Korean Contenders for Eternal and kind of shore up their flex DPS problem, I think.
Yeah, the Plat Chat had a segment on this. I think it was their head-to-head segment. Hex and Sideshow went off and talked about basically if Sparkle can live up to the hype, which is it's a great video, honestly. Chat, if you guys for some reason haven't heard of Plat Chat, their podcast, check them out on YouTube, and specifically this one discussion with Sideshow and Hex goes into this topic quite in depth. And I think that this topic is probably something that we could spend like 20 minutes on, but just kind of like to summarize, Sparkle is probably one of the people who is the individual who popped off at World Cup and people thought was like the greatest Flower.
Who was a
like
bust?
Who was a bust?
Who was a bust?
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that Flower was this same sort of character who was an extremely flexible, just young prodigy who just absolutely destroyed people when they played. And like the salary figures that were rumored to be going around for teams that were competing to pick up Sparkle were just absurd. Like numbers that made Mr. 150K Sinatra look like chump change, sort of things. Like there were a lot of organizations that were trying to compete for picking up Sparkle. You know, he was pretty much unquestionably the people that or the player that people were most interested about where he was going to end up. He was the most desired free agent, I guess, even though he's literally just turned 18 now on May 31st, like 4 days ago. But yeah, I think that the point that Sideshow and Hex made in more words than I'm going to right now is the fact that no matter how good Sparkle is, he's not going to live up to the hype just because the hype is so bloody enormous.
Unless he does and then exceeds the hype and single-handedly bench presses the Paris Eternal to the grand finals, in which case everyone will be eating.
I mean, if that happens, every single person will be wearing a Sparkle jersey at the grand finals.
Yeah. You know, there's technically, it is realistic to say he won't live up to it, but we could go for the unrealistic take and say he'll exceed it. We could.
I mean, you could. Yes.
We could.
I mean, at that point, I can just see it now. Every single person is going to just finally confess and come out of the closet that they were OG Element Mystic fans for the longest time, and I just can't wait for that to that to happen. But yeah, and there's like, I don't think that Sparkle. This is where I'm going to get in trouble because nobody knows these sort of things right now. But I don't think the characters that Sparkle has kind of really proven himself on are the characters that are meta or are going to be likely meta. You know, hero pools might have them show up more often than otherwise, but and you could maybe have the team go a little bit more towards the Florida Mayhem style, where they specifically play compositions that are closer to their specific style. Or maybe Sparkle is just living up to the hype. His genius, like prodigy level intellect and skill allows him to pick up the heroes that we haven't seen him play, and that he was only playing those heroes back then because those were the meta back then, and he can just play everything. Like, who knows?
Yeah,
it's gonna be fun to watch.
No one actually knows. It's more of a, once again, a classic sports situation that we walk away from, is that if Sparkle comes out here, the real story, chat, more so than anything, is not about actual Spark. It's not actually directly about Sparkle's performance. It's more of like the sidelines of that. Watching is that if Sparkle comes out and is okay or is good but not incredible, is this a justified pickup for teams to lose their mind at every new rookie that comes out? Everyone's like, yes, I need this guy. I will sell my blood pact for this man. Like anything you want, I will give it to you. Here's like a $500,000 contract, which is like not quite the level we were at for Sparkle, but it was close. It was close. Like the Sparkle rage, it was all the rage in the offseason. Everyone wanted Sparkle. And if he comes out and he disappoints, and we've already had other instances of such a thing happening, do teams continue to just lose their minds? Or do we ever rein it in? And my hypothesis is no, because every esport org, and especially every franchise type of team, is like the worst about FOMO ever. They're all the worst about FOMO. It's like we can't miss out. We can't miss out. We just can't, guys. We gotta go see. We can't miss out. So I don't think they're actually gonna learn anything from this instance if Sparkle comes out and is like a bust, which is like the real takeaway,
Yeah,
in my view.
there's one comment in chat. What were the disappointments? Flower was the one that we were talking about. Is the guy who we were historically comparing, who was the last individual who I would consider to have hype on levels anywhere close to what Sparkle is putting out. But yeah, we're definitely at kind of like preseason level of speculations where nobody has enough information to know right now. And there is the other side of things where a lot of people, as Eternal fans especially, have been super hyped about the Eternal. They've been doing well without Sparkle. So there is that thing where even without playing, Sparkle has definitely increased the stonks for Paris Eternal. Like they've gotten more fans, more hype, and more interest in this squad. So there's the intangibles. We'll add that to the qualitatives. But yeah, it'll be good to see. I hope it works out for him. And
I think it'll fix a big problem if he does pop off and be like really good, right? Because probably one of the biggest issues for Paris currently is a lack of consistent DPS, especially within the Flux DPS play compartments. Like Nico's actually performed well above what most people expect to come into the season, I think. But it's still clear that Paris as a team is currently falling short a lot of times because their DPS is not at the level to be like a top 4 team or a top 3 team. Like unless Soon and Nico have an incredibly good day, which is something you can't really rely upon. You want every day to be a good day. You want your average days to be a good day. You don't want you to have a miracles in the outfield type of performance for you to be at the level that you want to be.
Yeah, if you're going to be a top 4 team, you need DPS who are consistently playing at the peaks of Nico and Soon. Like Nico and Soon definitely have moments of brilliance, but I don't think that they're consistent players, at least not to the level of somebody like Carpe or something. So yeah, if they are going to break into that top 4, having a Carpe-like figure leading the charge is definitely something that I think most people looking at the Paris Eternal roster would be the thing that would cause them to improve the most out of it, and any other paper change you could make to the team.
Yeah, so I do think that there's like everyone. The one takeaway is just hold your breath, chat. Pause, champ. Hold your breath, and let's wait and see. And do teams continue to be big FOMOers? And my answer is probably yes. For always, they will be. But we can't spend all day talking about Sparkle because we also need to talk about Pajon.
Yeah,
Pajon has joined as assistant coach for the Spark. Still no longer a head coach. But I do think that that's a pretty interesting change, and in my opinion, is continuing to make Spark pretty nasty. I think like pretty sick nasty moving forward is that they've got an architect, and they've also got Pajon, who is pretty proven as a relatively good coach, like and is no longer even a head coach necessarily, but is going to add his coaching expertise to the roster. And it's a topic we wanted to touch on today, but we really had so much to already talk about, so we'll have to move it another time. But we've sort of evolved, at least I've evolved my views to focus more heavily moving forward into Overwatch League onto staff. And I think that's a pretty big move for Spark moving forward, is how does Pajon influence that team and move it forward? Because Spark has the talent now, especially with Architect, to be a contender for a title, I think, if they can make it work.
Yeah, I definitely think that Pajon is historically, I think that his style, as well as he has results as that assistant coach kind of level, if we're going to, I think that it would be wrong to discuss his success as head coach through the lens of the Vancouver Titans.
Yeah.
But either way, I don't think that this is a kind of individual. Some people are much more well suited to being a head coach. They like, so I can't imagine putting somebody like Krusty as an assistant coach. Like that's just, somebody who has, really truly a
Well,
vision
he
for a
was that
team.
for Boston essentially, and that
Well, we
look
know
how
how that
turned
worked
out.
out. We know
Yeah.
how that worked out. But I think that Paijon is going to be a great assistant coach, and the head coach for the Hangzhou Spark is Mask, who I don't know much about personally, but he had great success with X6 Gaming as well.
And you could
So
argue they still had plenty of success. They still had plenty of success previously with Spark. I mean, Spark finished very strong towards the end of last season.
yes,
They've still done okay throughout this season. Not great, but okay. So nothing to really reflect that poorly on for Mask, I think, either. I think they're
yeah,
just beefing it up,
yeah. So I
right?
think like Spark is just solidifying. That feels like the word that fits the best here, and the fact that they're fleshing things out anywhere that they might have weakness. They're getting more individuals, and like pickups like Architect and Pagion, even if they have little effect, they're not going to have negative effect. In no way, in no world do I ever see that these changes are going to reduce the power level of Spark. So things only looking up for them.
Yeah, stonks only go up. Stonks only go up for the Spark. Any comment on Mandu being available? That was actually going to be our next topic, was
It
Mandu.
certainly was. You know
Uh,
the future.
they do. That was Mandu. I think is gonna be crazy. Is my particular view. I think he's gonna be very very good. He was really good in contenders because if you guys aren't aware, Mandu was the main support partner to Myungbug, who has obviously been nuts, but obviously not with a well-performing team. But coming in from O2 Blast, they made a splash in contenders, and he's been picked up for New York, but he hasn't been of age, and now he just came of age. And I think he's going to be very, very good. He's in a style sort of like Li Gong. I don't think he's quite as hyper aggressive, but very similar. Gonna be nuts. I think. I think he's gonna be a good addition, and it'll be something that will actually, in my view, shore up potentially some of the weaknesses that New York have.
Now, that's an interesting statement here because Mandu, you know way more about Mandu than I do, in the fact that I didn't actually know that Mandu was a thing or person that existed until New York was like, by the way, we picked
Unknown
up.
entity.
I was just like, you've got way more knowledge about Korean contenders than I do. But Animo never really came across to me kind of as a weakness for the New York Excelsior. So when you see kind of Mando being signed in, I don't really know the general power level of these two players. I know that Animo is, quite consistently good, especially, Arc when he was, I think that Arc has fallen off since his time on New York Excelsior, but, Animo replaced Arc when Arc was playing at his peak, which is a pretty impressive feat, and I don't think that he's declined very much since then. So if Mandu is actually going to be seeing playtime, it kind of makes sense that he's going to be playing over Animo. So whether they're going to be kind of making it like a Beast NumLock situation, which we are hypothesizing is kind of like a Winston Reinhardt relationship or something like that, I don't know. But the most interesting part to me is kind of like, why are they picking this new player up for a role that didn't really seem like a weakness?
Well, first of all, a couple points for leading into this. One, I'm not convinced that NumLock Beast situation is going to be symbiotic at all. I think it's going to be potentially like I think NumLock might very well just consume Beast and make him into the larger. Like he's gonna. I don't think that might be a very mutualistic relationship by means. And secondly, someone is complaining in chat because technically this is the pronunciation. It's not Animo, it's Anamo. So it's Anamo. So I know,
Man, I can barely speak English. Don't expect
I'm just
me to.
telling you, people are complaining in chat. I that's just the thing. And thirdly, to finally answer the question, uh Anamo or Anamo, I want to say Anamo again. Now I'm caught in the trap. But Anamo, it was a very balanced Lucio player.
Mhm.
Um someone who's mechanically gifted, someone that was mechanically gifted, but wasn't excessively aggressive, wasn't necessarily a playmaker. He was just very, very balanced. He's a very similar style, I think, to Moth, but overall, Moth is still overall better, but also knows how to get aggressive much better than Anamo does. Because I think Moth knows when to be aggressive, and Anamo tends to be just overall much more passive. But Mandu is just Li Gong. I am blitzkrieging like riding what is it? Riding Eternal and Chrome like Mad Max,
Oh,
like that. That's what it was.
ride or die.
Ride or die. Like it's like shiny forever, like into Valhalla. Like that's Mandu and Li Gong. Like they just go in. They don't stop. They're hyper aggressive, and I think that's sort of where he fits. And that's what New York as a whole has always struggled with outside of season 1. Because season 1, it was like we're pocketing Jonak. Like we're literally just giving our life force to Jonak, and we will survive and we will achieve victory. But Overwatch isn't really played in that style anymore.
No.
And it requires a lot more of a dynamic play style, particularly for your main support. Which is why they replaced Arc. I think not just, but also why they're looking for a counterpart to Anamo. And I do think that he can actually help shore up some of the weaknesses for New York, where they sometimes fall into these traps of being too passive, or they're not able to make just the right amount of opening plays that they need. And obviously this is besides the point of like their whole roster issues and like what compositions they're running. But I do think that he actually makes New York as a roster a lot more well-rounded. And that's why I think he's been added, is because he's not nearly as passive and is far more aggressive and far more playmakery.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I love having your knowledge of Korean contenders to lean upon, because that does make me a lot more excited. Instead of kind of like, we're not using. If you don't think that the Beast and the NumLock situation is going to be like we were discussing, then more like the Moth Twilight situation, because Moth is very comfortable on Lucio, and like you were saying, he knows kind of how and when to engage, but doesn't feel as comfortable on the Ana and the Zenyatta from what we know and from what Krusty spoke about in his interview. But, on the other side, going with Anamo and Mandu, instead of just sharing heroes, doing something more like AKM and Timo did in Stage 4 Season 1 with Widowmaker, where, they would play, they would swap out AKM and Timo based off of the map or the opponent, because they both played Widow, both played it very well, but played it in completely different styles, and one style of Widowmaker was better. So that is, and an aggressive support, an aggressive main support, definitely, just in my head feels like it would fit better with how the rest of New York has already been playing and likes to play.
Yeah, I think overall it just makes things a lot better for them. It just is really what they need to become more well-rounded. We also have Coach Gumbo leaving for Overwatch League for Valorant. Yeah, that's something that to be taught. I mean, they've already said it, I think, at this point, but like because that Valiant and Immortals are doing kind of an odd thing where like Gumbo left to be assistant coach for Valorant, but also Packington is also currently a head coach for both their Overwatch League team and their Valorant team.
Yeah, so like,
which is an odd practice.
Yeah, I think they're going from because Packington was on this show and we interviewed him, and I think during that segment he spoke about working with Immortals in order to start up their Immortals for Valorant roster as well. So it's kind of like Gumba's leaving for Valorant, but it's in the same org, working with the same people. So it seems more like a vertical movement. You're moving up in the same organization. You're getting kind of more responsibility.
If anything, I would say it's horizontal, because I think he's just the assistant coach. He's just still under Packington, just now with Valorant.
But
which
Packington
I think is
also
weird.
Moved up to head coach of all esports.
Yeah, of two teams, right? It's just weird. It's a weird thing to do. But I mean, we've covered the roster moves for us. We've run actually a tiny bit long, but we have to go over our mailbag that we asked, which was we have one good response as we run a little bit long. And also, by the way, for any of the Call of Duty fans, Off the Break is not happening after this, because of the fact that obviously the event is not happening this week. So we had to schedule some stuff around. So there is no Off the Break happening after this.
Breaking news: Envytv taking a break in OWL 2020.
Oh, well, that makes even more sense then. If Envytv wanted to mutually part ways, if he wants to just take a break, and just say, "Fuck it," there's my F-bomb. And
you had to get that one in for the episode.
There we go. There's my F-bomb, but it makes even more sense. No, we're not. I mean, I'm not particularly too worried about that. We can talk about it a little bit more, but that was my producer.
We already spoke,
to us, by the way.
We already spoke about Envytv earlier in the episode. If you have just joined us, we're not going to go over his tweet longer, but he did.
Nothing has really changed my thoughts on that. It's about the same thing.
Well, Lolsish is still stored in the closet, but
and Lolsish will be gone. There's no way Lolsish isn't gone soon. Like, there's just no way. There's just He's
What?
done so.
Mailbag, our good response. Who's it from today?
It was from like Overwatch 123. This one was not a
That's-
YouTube comment. This one was actually a Reddit comment. Which was said, we asked what were your sort of how would you rank the current Overwatch League teams based on this point, sort of based on their staff. And they had their tier 1 is Shock, Eternal, Dragons, Fusion, Mayhem, Valiant, which I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I tend to agree. Tier 2, they have Reign, Spitfire, Dynasty, Charge, Excelsior, Gladiators, Fuel, Spark, and Outlaws. That's a really big tier 2.
Yeah.
Like a really big tier 2. Gigantic, even. I think there's probably some room for variation for the most part, but reasonable. So I think, like, looking at it for the most part, I tend to agree. I think maybe you could argue for, like, especially with Outlaws' early results, that if they deserve a tier 2 placing in there. But whatever. And then tier 3, which is they did well, but they did not do well, but they're starting to show improvements and such in the main melee, which is like Hunters, Defiant, Uprising, Titans, Justice, which I'm pretty okay with all that. I just think it can be expanded. I think it can all be expanded with that tier 3. But that was our like sort of ranking them based off the staff for like Overwatch 1, 2, 3. Do you have any dissenting opinions there, Jayne, or do you?
I actually had to look up the Atlanta Reign organization. So Brad is actually still the head coach.
Still head coach, yeah. And then Silence is their assistant coach, who they credit for like a lot of their strategic depth.
Mm-hmm. And they still have Danny, who I've worked with on Team Canada. He's a data science, more of like an analyst, does a lot of spreadsheets and things like that. And then Mentalist, who is
Mentalist.
What's Mentalist?
GC Mentalist Busan? Was from GC Busan, which is where Edison was from.
Yeah, so I for some reason I had it in my head that Seffi was an owner instead of a head coach, but I guess he is still.
Or you mean more of like a GM?
Yeah, perhaps, he always just came like that's always the role that I've kind of seen him at. So I was ragging myself. Who's the head coach for Atlanta? But yeah, it's still Seffi.
Nope, still the Sefster. But overall, like an okay list, I'd say. Like it's pretty stratified, but I think you could also delineate tier 2. Like my biggest complaint with that, I think Outlaws probably especially because of their early performances need to go into the tier 3, and then maybe as the season goes on you can move them up. But it is what it is. Atlanta was going to have that traveling scrim bus. Really, they were going to have a traveling scrim bus? I didn't know that. That's news to me. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. Atlanta's willing to drop some mad cash on stuff, but that's pretty crazy. They were going to have the battle bus. They're going to have the battle bus zooming around for scrims and things like that. But for that, we've sort of started to reach the conclusion of our episode. Today's been a very roster-focused episode and farming-related episode, I feel.
Yeah, a lot of strawberries.
A lot of strawberry
Moira.
talk. A lot of Moira, yeah. That's also a lot of Moira. But we should also, I guess, put out a call to action for next week.
A call to action?
A call to action for the viewers. And also because next week actually, next week we should return to a normalish schedule. I don't know if we've decided if we're doing only one show again, because technically there aren't games this weekend, right? It's not till next week.
Hello, producer God. Are we doing a show next Tuesday? I love talking to the voices in my head. You wouldn't have heard that because
they can't hear that. That was producer talking to us.
But producer says no episode for next Tuesday. We will be back on Thursday. But before then, we need
a mailbag,
a call to action.
A mailbag, a call to action, whatever you may say.
Keep people satisfied and fulfilled for a full week.
I'm pretty. First of all, we did also, if you guys didn't notice, we did not do a Jack in the Box popping off this week.
True.
Because we want to ask you guys a question. We want to perhaps see, and perhaps I can even link it into my own sub tournament. We can have perhaps a Jack in the Box popping off for my sub tournament. I don't know, but we can. If anyone has clips they would like to send in from their ranked games, from the Element Mystic or from the Lunatic High Runaway Show match, like anything like that, we'll do a quick review of community clips, and we could be like, hey, who's going to be the Jack in the Box popping off for next week? It could be from the sub tournament. Like, I don't know. It could be Jayne for all we know. Jayne's going to say
I'm in the sub tournament.
He could be participating.
Did you see the clip from the show match where the two Genjis reflected the fire strike and both instantly died?
I did see that. It was from Kaiser, like reviewing it, right? Yeah, I think it was.
Kaiser just cackles and laughter as he saw that. It was great.
But overall, if you have any clips of yourself in ranked and like scrims, or from the sub tournament, from even from the Lunatic High Runaway Show match, anything that you would like to potentially be a popping off, we'll review it, and it could be a segment for next week. That I think that's a pretty good call. I think that's a pretty interesting thing to see.
Send us clips of you popping off.
Of you popping off. Or your favorite pop.
I'll go to Mr. Jack and make sure that we can get you a gift card or something. And you Jack in the Box gift card, man. So go pop off in ranked and send us your clip.
Yeah, maybe a VIP in the channel again. No, but I don't think we know if we should give out any more VIPs in the NB channel necessarily.
Yeah, we got wrecked. We had to give out 2 VIPs last time.
The VIPs are a precious commodity.
Way too big brain. Way too big brain, chat.
All right, well, that's been that. Hit it to us in the YouTube comments, or also in a Reddit thread, or send it to us, whichever one you may think. Obviously all the people here from my community can do it via Discord potentially. Like, you have a lot of options, but all those options, we want to see that. Hopefully we'll see much like a farmer, we want to see the fruits of this labor come next week, like strawberries, which are also and that has been another episode of Contested for the week. We'll be back next week because only one episode. And then after that we'll go back to a normal schedule because games have been on. But I'm Avast. This is Jayne.
Hi.
And that has been Contested.
Bye.